Chapter 8. Friendless. Walking around the courtyard of the camp located in FEMA Region 7, Jim watched as people moved from one building to the next, as if it were just another day. While doing so, he wondered how they were not outraged over being forced into such a prison-style environment. He had heard his mother talk at length about the FEMA facilities, which was yet another time Jim wished he had listened rather than writing her off as a conspiracy theorist. Now that he was standing inside the camp, staring at the large concrete buildings and razor wire atop 2 rows of fencing, he understood the few comments he remembered his mother making. "Jimmy, if they built them in case of an emergency, how did they know where they would be needed?" Jim remembered his mother saying this, but the one question he remembered most at the moment was her asking, "Jimmy, if those places are there to help free people, why do they have guard towers and fences to keep people from leaving?" "I hear you, Mom," Jim whispered to himself, replying to the questions his mother had asked long ago, as he continued his walk around the camp feeling the sorrow of her death once again. "Jim!" Jim kept walking, gradually turning away from the direction he had heard the voice, determined not to make any friends ever again. Since his group had been escorted to their building and the beds they were assigned to, Jim had done his best to avoid Kevin, who was now calling his name. "Jim, over here, man!" Stepping a little faster, Jim picked up speed, but not enough to appear like he was trying to get away from Kevin. Jim did not want to hurt the big man's feelings, but at the same time he didn't want to become close to anyone else. Walking briskly, Jim headed into a large group where people had gathered between 2 of the large residential buildings, thinking it would be a great way to lose Kevin. Pushing through those gathered became more difficult the farther in he ventured. After his 100th, "Excuse me," Jim began to feel he had made a mistake, a feeling that was confirmed in his mind when he broke through to an open space in the center. There he found the reason for the gathering as he came face to face with the speaker. "Dawn?" Jim asked, surprised to see the girl from the bus. "People, this is the guy I was telling you about. Jim," Dawn announced to her gathering. Jim began to look for a way out, but only found that the people had packed in even closer once he had made his way through. Dawn moved alongside Jim and placed her arm across his shoulders, pulling him next to her. "I didn't think Kevin would be able to find you so quick," she said only to Jim. "Great. I ran right where they wanted me." Jim wanted to scream, but only stood silently searching for a way out. Looking around at the crowd of people, he could tell they were starving for information and hung on every word Dawn had to say. Jim figured her to be a little older than himself, and noticed that even those in the group twice her age listened as she spoke with the voice and strength of a true leader. "This is the man I told you about. He and his friend rode into our town only to be attacked by those who say they have come to help us. That somehow this is for our safety," Dawn said, pointing up to the building and the rest of their surroundings. "How are we not safe in our own homes, in our own town? Now, I am not saying to storm the gates. That would only get many injured or killed. What we must do is watch out for each other and prepare for whatever happens next. Now, I know you are waiting to hear from Jim, so I will shut my trap and let him speak." "What?" Jim almost shouted, and then attempted to pull away from Dawn only to have her pull him in tighter. "It's okay, Jim. Tell everyone here about what is happening on the West Coast," Dawn said in a soothing voice. "Damn, you're good," Jim thought, as he felt the need to break the pact he made with himself to keep his mouth shut, since his last few attempts to warn people had failed. The seconds ticked by as Jim battled his thoughts. Noticing the difficulty Jim was having, Dawn thought it best to help get him started. "What Jim has tried to warn the people running this place about is the fact that our country has been invaded," Dawn said as all those gathered around gasped in surprise, collectively loud enough to drown out everything around. With her statement, the battle taking place in Jim's mind was over. "Yes, I am from California. The power did not go out from a solar flare or any other natural event. It was obviously an attack, and the Chinese are heading this way," Jim said loudly, something that he could see bothered Dawn as she motioned with her hand for him to lower his volume. Following her advice, Jim began speaking only loud enough for the majority of the group to hear, and this time he spoke clearly. I watched as they bombed city after city. I watched as many died when bombs fell on their homes with them inside, too scared to venture out. I watched as helicopters used their guns to fire on streets full of people. I watched as my closest friends died beside me. Jim lowered his head as he fought back the tears, and the crowd remained silent, overwhelmed by what they had just heard. Believing that Jim had said enough and that he needed time to recover from the memory, Dawn once again began to speak. "You heard, Jim. We are under attack by a foreign power. The Chinese have declared war on us. What is our government doing about it? Locking us up so that we cannot defend ourselves. But that is just what we are going to do. Keep each other informed, gather what weapons you can, and watch out for one another. Go and spread what you have learned to others." Dawn turned her attention away from the group and focused on Jim, signaling with her body language that she had nothing more to share with them. "They needed to hear that," Dawn informed Jim. "There has to be more we can do besides just talk," Jim replied, forgetting he was trying to avoid making any connections with new people. "Jim, what you just told those people is going to change how they see this place. From my last count, at any one time, there are only a few dozen guards and thousands of us. When the time is right, you will see things happen. Come with me. I have something to show you," Dawn said, taking Jim by the hand and leading him through the crowd. Once back in the yard, Jim heard his name called out once again. "Jim!" Recognizing the voice as Kevin's, this time instead of avoiding him, Jim stopped, pulling free of Dawn's hand and said, "I'll be right behind you," he told her as he turned in the direction he had heard his name. While he waited, he kept an eye on the direction Dawn was walking, thankful Kevin was close, so she had not gone far. "Glad you heard me this time. I really didn't want to bring attention to myself by calling your name louder than I did," Kevin informed Jim as he began walking beside him. Jim replied, "Yeah, I must have been daydreaming." "You know where she is heading?" Kevin asked, surprising Jim, since he could barely see Dawn at this point. Shrugging his shoulders, Jim replied, "I don't know. She wanted to show me something, so I'm following her." "Oh, it's probably the secret hole they are digging into one of the buildings, though I don't know why. I would think you would want to dig out of here, not in deeper. What is your opinion, Jim?" "Secret hole? You're helping her?" Jim asked as they continued to follow Dawn. "Oh no, I am just good at noticing things. Take the guards, for instance. They are on a 12-hour rotation, with 6 hours in between shifts. 12 on, 6 off," Kevin explained. Looking up at the large man with a surprised expression, Jim asked, "How do you know that? We have only been here for 2 days." "No clue. They say it has something to do with the way my brain senses patterns," Kevin said, like it was no big deal to him. Jokingly, Jim asked, "Didn't happen to find a key to the front door, did you?" He began laughing at the thought. "No, but I can tell you from the smudge prints on the keypad that somebody is most likely using the pin 2000. For some reason, people feel that as long as they avoid using one for the first number for their pin, it is a strong 4-digit code," Kevin said, understanding full well the importance of the information. "What?" Jim said, unable to control the volume of his own voice as he froze in place. Grabbing Jim by the arm, Kevin pulled him along, saying, "Quiet, man. Outbursts like that will get you noticed, and that is the last thing we need." "But you just told me—" "Stop talking, man," Kevin ordered. Taking heed, the two walked along in silence, following Dawn. With every step, Jim desperately wanted to find out what other surprising information Kevin had learned about the place, but he did not dare ask. "She's gone," Kevin stated, losing sight of Dawn. Deep in thought, Jim had forgotten what they were even doing. Instead of focusing on Dawn, he was just following Kevin, and now she was gone. "I thought you were watching her. Just use your magic and find her," Jim said, partly joking and partly serious. "It doesn't work like that," Kevin said, looking around for signs of where she might have gone. "Okay, Kevin, where did you last see her?" Pointing, Kevin replied, "Over next to that group of people watching the kids playing soccer." The two of them watched the group cheer the children on with no signs of Dawn. Suddenly, someone from behind them asked, "What are you looking for, boys?" Turning toward each other, Kevin looked down at Jim as he looked up at Kevin. "Found her," the one said to the other. "How did you get behind us?" Jim asked Dawn. "Dad took me hunting all the time, and I had to learn how to get around without being seen," Dawn answered with a smile on her face, pleased with her skills of moving around without being seen. "You two ready to keep up with me? Kevin, you should also see this." "Shit, I picked up 2 friends," Jim thought before answering. "Yes, how about you show us this hole you're digging?" Jim said, hoping that Kevin would not mind that he used his information and at the same time showing off. By the expression on her face, it was not hard to tell that his information was good, or that Dawn was surprised to hear what he knew. "Quiet," Dawn responded, pulling him off to one side. Once the 3 were as isolated as they could be in a heavily populated prison, she said softly, "Yes, that is where I am taking you. Later you will have to tell me how you knew about it. For now, I am going to just show you." When Dawn finished speaking, she used the heel of her foot to kick the foundation of the building behind her. Jim heard a thud and looked down to see an opening appear. "When I say go, drop and move inside quickly." Dawn watched as people walked over and causally gathered around them. Jim remembered seeing many of the people at the meeting earlier. "Go! Go!" Dawn said quickly. Jim dropped on the first sound uttered. First Jim, then Kevin, who due to his size took a little longer, and finally Dawn entered, allowing the group of people to dissipate as she placed the cover back over the hole. "So this is the hole? A hole under a building?" Jim asked, unimpressed. "No, follow me," Dawn replied sharply. They moved slowly on hands and knees with very little clearance between their backs and the floor above. Moving in such a cramped space with little light creeping through vents along the foundation, the 40 feet to the other side seemed endless. Nearing the concrete foundation, Jim felt the dirt underneath his hands change in texture from a gravelly filing to powder. "We're here. Gather around," Dawn said softly, to prevent her voice from echoing through the void. With her eyes adjusted to the darkness, Dawn watched the other 2 attempt to move around to a more comfortable position. While doing so, she had a difficult time controlling her laughter each time she heard a thud followed with a moan as they bumped their heads on the floor above. Once the 2 had finished moving and rubbing their heads, Dawn began. "The reason I brought you here is that just on the other side of this concrete is the basement of the adjoining building. A basement used to hold anyone deemed a threat. We're going to free them and take control of the camp." "How did Kevin end up with us? His size alone should have caused him to be considered a threat," Jim asked, having felt intimidated by Kevin's size from the first time he met him. "Because Kevin is only 15, Dawn said, surprised Jim had not figured that out by now. Twisting in surprise at the new information, Jim bumped his head once more on the joist above. "Damn it," he said again as he rubbed the fresh bump and then added, 15? Really?" Kevin raised his shoulders, not realizing that Jim couldn't see his gesture, but that didn't matter, because Jim was already asking another question. "How the hell did you get so big?" This time Kevin answered, "Oh, I am not. I am the runt of my family." "Hey, that isn't the point of all this," Dawn angrily whispered. Cautiously turning to avoid another bump, Jim focused his attention back to why they were underneath the building. Sensing she had their attention once again, Dawn continued, "We are almost through and ready to move forward. Once we bust through, we have no choice but to begin taking the facility." Unable to believe what he was hearing, Jim had many questions. "Wait, what? We have only been here for a few days, and you have already hatched this plan and dug through 2 feet of concrete?" Dawn responded, "Don't be absurd. Of course not. I was brought into this because those who have been working on it for the last few weeks trusted me. I knew Kevin from school, and you, well, I figured after what happened in town with your friend, you would want payback." With his vision adjusting to the darkness, Jim was able to see that the ground he sat on was brighter than the rest of the area. He also could see the large hole that had been dug into the concrete. Suddenly he figured out why the texture of the ground changed as he had been crawling. After thinking about the plan for a few seconds, While he was running his fingers through the fine powder lying on the ground, Jim asked, "How do you know they will fight once you break through?" "We communicate with them through the hole. Weeks ago, a small hole was made to see what was inside. The hole was started in hopes of entering the weapons locker. Since then, they take turns at standing in front of the hole so that it isn't discovered. These guys want out to fight," Dawn explained. "When does it all begin?" Kevin asked. He could hear the sadness in Dawn's voice as she answered, "After we find a way inside the main building where the weapons are located. So far it has been impossible, and the men inside that prison are only becoming weaker." "We have a way in!" Jim blurted out with excitement. Grabbing Jim by the arm, Kevin asked as he pulled him closer, "What are you doing?" Before he could answer, Dawn asked excitedly, "What do you mean you have a way in?" Without addressing Kevin's question, Jim replied to Dawn's, "Kevin here knows the code." "How?" she asked, unaware her voice had risen in volume. "It is only an 82% probability," Kevin replied, notably bothered by being put in such a position. From the other side of the wall, a voice said, "That's good enough for us." "Who was that?" Jim asked, startled by the sudden sound of a new voice. "That is our guy organizing the men on the inside of the room. Used to work for the FBI in Texas. Said his name is Sam."